Hi, welcome to the Artist Gallery. We are going to talk today about one of my favorite artists and one of the biggest artists of the Renaissance, and that's Leonardo da Vinci. So if you are one of my students, make sure that you have your images and a writing utensil. You should be taking down the notes that appear on the screen that correspond with each image from the Leonardo da Vinci section of your packet. So we are going to begin today with Leonardo da Vinci. Now, Leonardo da Vinci is a Renaissance man. Uh, he was obviously an artist of the High Renaissance, which took place right after the medieval times. This is a rebirth of humanism, of religion, of science and ingenuity. So Leonardo da Vinci, he's known as a Renaissance man because he was not only good at just one subject, he was good at an insane amount of topics, including drawing and painting, sculpture, architecture, music, mathematics, engineering, literature, anatomy, geology, astronomy, botany, paleontology, cartography, science, and invention. Leonardo da Vinci did so many things that he was extremely well known for. He was born April 15th, 1452 in Anciano, Italy. That is right by the town of Vinci, which is where Leonardo's last name comes from. So in the Renaissance, da Vinci wouldn't be a given last name. That literally means of Vinci or from the area of Vinci. So the specific town is called Anciano, but he is from the area of Vinci. He died on May 2nd of 1519, so he did live a nice, long life. Now, Leonardo da Vinci is known as a phenomenal artist and one of the greatest painters in the history of art, but there are a lot of other really cool things about him. Leonardo da Vinci was left-handed or perhaps ambidextrous. All of his notes are written backwards, so starting from the right side and moving over, which you would do if you were left-handed, but that's an insane way to write. He's crazy. Leonardo da Vinci was a vegetarian. During the Renaissance, it was incredibly difficult to do. He had a huge love for animals. It was said he often would buy caged birds and set them free. He was considered a handsome man. He was tall with flowing blonde hair, and he had a lovely singing voice. So he's one of those people that was good at everything. So I want to show you this video about the Mona Lisa, where doctors Beth Harris and Stephen Zucker visit the Louvre Museum in Paris, where the Mona Lisa is located, and they talk a little bit about it. So let's take a listen. I love these videos. I think they're fantastic.
We're in the single most crowded room in the Louvre, but for good reason. This is the room that holds the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. Without a doubt, the most famous painting in the world.
Of course, it's her smile that's so famous today, and it certainly is a smile that doesn't clearly tell us what she's feeling. It's ambiguous.
And I think it allows people to read into it in any way that they prefer.
Sigmund Freud, for example, saw a combination of maternal gaze, but also a gaze that was flirtatious. And I think I do see both of those aspects here. This is a portrait of the wife of a Florentine merchant. And as we look out at the sea of people taking selfies in front of the Mona Lisa, it's good to remember that only the elite could have their portrait painted during the Renaissance. This was an expensive proposition. And of course, you'd have to go and sit for the artist many times so that he could capture your likeness.
Because they were expensive, they were reserved for kings and queens and the nobility. What we see during the Renaissance is the growth of the merchant class. And the fact that a wealthy merchant would hire Leonardo to paint his wife's portrait is a reminder of the fortunes that are being made by traders, by bankers, and others during the Renaissance.
Well, especially in the city of Florence, which was such an economic hub during the Renaissance. And we know, in fact, that the patron of this painting was a cloth merchant.
This painting has quite a number of innovations, but one of the most important is that it's half-length. Generally, portraits were busts, that is, from the chest up.
This was an incredibly influential new formula for the portrait. If you think about the standard form of the portrait before this, with the figure in profile, bust length, it's a very static pose, very formal, very stiff. But as soon as Leonardo turned the head toward us, positioned the shoulders 3/4 toward us also, and included the hands, suddenly we had an image of a figure that was much more natural, someone who you could imagine having a conversation with. Portraits that included a background and that also included the hands did exist in the Northern Renaissance, but this is a new formula for Italy and will be tremendously influential with artists like Raphael and others.
Another very influential aspect of this painting is a technique that Leonardo employed, which is known as sfumato. That simply means smoke, and what it refers to is that slightly hazy quality that Leonardo introduces to remove the sometimes sharp quality that existed in early Renaissance paintings, where each object looks too isolated. It's an atmospheric quality that creates a sense of unity throughout the painting.
And makes the figure appear to almost emerge out of the darkness. So we see that she's seated on a chair in a loggia or open porchway, and we see on either side of her what look like the base of two columns. We don't know if the painting was cut down and there were originally full columns on either side of her, but we do know that early copies of this painting do show those columns on either side of the figure.
There's a lot about this painting that we don't fully understand. This was a commission, and yet Leonardo kept the painting. He never delivered it to the man who commissioned it. And later in Leonardo's life, when he moved to France, he brought the painting with him, which is why it's now in the Louvre. One question that I think we should address is, why is this the most famous image in the world?
Well, it reminds me of another very famous image of a woman that's very ambiguous and mysterious, and that's the woman with the pearl earring by Vermeer from more than a century later. Perhaps our culture has some fascination with images of mysterious women.
I think that's probably an important part of it, but then I think fame grows on itself. In 1911, the painting was stolen, and it was headlines around the world, and that accelerated its fame, and it has become the subject of numerous other paintings by artists as diverse as Marcel Duchamp or Andy Warhol. This raises an interesting issue. Here's a painting that was made for a private home, to exist in a domestic interior, to celebrate a man's wife, or to celebrate a specific occasion, perhaps the birth of a child or the purchasing of a new home. But here it is instead in a huge gallery with hundreds of people, a painting that exists in millions of multiples around the world. It's such an unexpected fate for what Leonardo surely saw as a relatively minor commission.
Fantastic. So I love their discussion of it. There are a couple of things about the Mona Lisa and that Dr. Beth Harris and Stephen Zucker pointed out that I want us to discuss. So the first image that you should include in your art journals for Leonardo da Vinci is the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa was painted in 1503, and it is undoubtedly the most famous portrait in the world. So in the video, they touched on some of the reasons why this portrait is considered the most famous portrait in the world. And there are a few reasons why. One of them is that slight smile that the subject has. Most of the portraits at the time were very stern-faced. You had to sit for hours to get your portrait painted, right, by an artist in the 1500s. So to smile was very difficult to do for more than a minute or so. So the fact that she has this smirk or smile made her really stand out. She also, like they showed in the video, is in a 3/4 pose. You can see her hands. That was totally revolutionary. I think the biggest reason, though, that she's so famous is that she was stolen from the Louvre in 1911, and they talked about this in the video, by Vincent Perugia, who's an Italian handyman who worked for the museum. The museum is the Louvre Museum in France, the largest art museum in the world, and the man who stole it thought that the painting deserved to be in Italy because Leonardo da Vinci was Italian. So he hid in a closet at the museum and waited for it to close, and then he just took the Mona Lisa off the wall and stuck it under his jacket and left. The Mona Lisa is small, right? It's only barely larger than a foot in size. So a lot of people assume this is a huge painting, but it's not. She's not that big. So he just walked out with it. Museum security was not very good in the 1910s. He was caught after 2 years in December of 1913 attempting to sell the Mona Lisa to an art museum in Florence, Italy. So it was gone for 2 years, and that stir is what led to its fame. People flocked from all over the world to see this painting when it was finally returned. It was in newspapers everywhere. So that helped bring about the fame of the painting. One of the other reasons why it's so famous is that Leonardo da Vinci did not finish a lot of paintings. There are only about 15, maybe less, finished paintings attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. That's a minuscule amount of artwork. Most artists have hundreds or thousands of finished paintings, but Leonardo da Vinci was a huge procrastinator. He also would jump back and forth between subjects. He would start a painting but not finish it because he got onto thinking about inventing a helicopter or something like that. She uses the sfumato technique, which is that smoky haziness that makes everything appear kind of soft-edged in the painting. And for a long time, she had a mysterious identity. Now, we know who she is now, but for a long time, people were not sure who this subject was. Some people wondered if it was Leonardo da Vinci himself. They said the face looked similar, but now we know who the woman is in the painting. The next artwork that we should include, I'm going to actually move myself up here, is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. The Last Supper was painted in 1498, and right now it is in very poor condition. You can see missing sections of paint, and it's crumbling. The painting did not survive very well, and there are a few reasons for that. The biggest reason why the painting is not in good condition now is that Leonardo da Vinci used a new technique. He had the idea to mix tempera paint and oil paint with a fresco technique. So this is painted on the wall of a church. So it's inside. And if you were painting something on a wall in the Renaissance, you would use a fresco technique, which meant you would mix pigment with wet plaster as you applied it to the wall. So that when the paint dried, it basically was the wall. It became a part of the wall. It wasn't sitting on the surface. As the plaster dried, the color soaked in, and the painting actually was the wall. But Leonardo wanted more vibrant colors than fresco allowed for. So he wanted to mix oil and tempera paint in order to do that. Unfortunately, oil and tempera paint did not adhere well to the surface of this plaster wall, and as moisture soaked through the plaster, it started pushing that oil paint right off the surface, so the paint would flake and chip very easily. And then in an effort to preserve the painting, the church where this is located hung a big heavy curtain in front of it. But every time they would open and close the curtain, it would scrape against the painting and peel more of the paint off. So unfortunately, it is not in very good condition right now. I'm going to remove these just so that you can see the whole thing. So this is a painting of Jesus, who's in the center, and his disciples at the Last Supper. This is the meal they have together where Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." And all of the disciples at that moment are trying to figure out who it is. What is it me? No, it's not me, it's you. One of the revolutionary things that Leonardo does in this painting, and I think there are two positive ones. The negative one was the oil paint that didn't stick. But he uses one-point perspective to draw the viewer's eye towards Jesus. Now, Jesus is the figure here in the center, and he uses this perspective by having these edges of the building. If you look at these doorways and even the lines in the ceiling, if they were all to converge, they're all pointing to Jesus's head. They've also centered Jesus right in front of this window, which kind of acts like a halo. So your eye is drawn to him because he's right in the center, and the building itself points to him. The other revolutionary thing that was brand new for the time, that had not been done in the 1400s, was he included Judas on the same side of the table. Most artists, when they depicted the Last Supper, they had Jesus and 11 of his disciples, and then Judas sat by himself on the other side of the table. So it was really obvious who the traitor was going to be. In this version of the painting, Judas, who is this figure right here, is included with the rest of the group. And the only way that you know that he's Judas, his face is slightly in shadow, which, makes him appear a little bit more sinister. And he's holding a bag of silver coins, which would be the coins he was paid to betray Jesus. By the way, the Renaissance, big, point in history for Christian art. The Christian religion was everywhere, so lots and lots of religious artwork here. There were plenty of things that Leonardo did that were not religious. This, the Vitruvian Man, which you don't have to include in your journal, is one example of a sketch from his notebooks, of which he had hundreds, done in about 1490. The C before the date means circa. That means about 1490. We don't know exactly when this page was drawn. And the Vitruvian Man, which is a very famous image by Leonardo, depicts ideal body proportions for this adult male that's standing both inside a square and a circle. Leonardo also had designs for all sorts of inventions, including armored tanks, solar power, helicopters, hang gliders, bridges, early robots, and more. He would dissect human cadavers, like dead bodies, so that he could study the skeletal and muscular systems and learn all about how the human body worked, which was amazing and also must have smelled bad. The next painting that you do not have to include is called The Virgin of the Rocks, painted in 1486. This is another great example of the sfumato, that blurry haziness that he uses all around the painting. So nothing seems to have a hard, crisp edge. It all seems softer, which makes it seem a little bit more natural. So the Renaissance was an explosion of creativity, humanity, and Christian religion. This particular painting depicts Mary and Christ, with St. John the Baptist and an angel. So baby Christ here is doing a sign of prayer or blessing. A blessing. And St. John the Baptist over on the left is praying, little baby Jesus and St. John. Leonardo uses a lot of really cool things in this painting, and one of them that was really unique to the time was a triangular composition. So he arranges his figures so that Mary's head is kind of the top point of the triangle, and then goes down here to St. John and down this way to the angel. And that angular composition, he thought, added some dynamic interest to the painting. The other thing I just want to point out, because cultural appropriation is a really important topic right now in today's discussion, is that all of these figures are painted white, which, if you think about the history of the Christian religion, Jesus, being born in Bethlehem, and Mary and John the Baptist, these figures are all Middle Eastern. So they all would have been from modern day Turkey, Syria, Iran. That was the area of the world where these biblical figures would have been from. So they would not have looked the way that Leonardo depicts them in these paintings, where they have this really pale skin with this very light hair. They would not have actually looked that way in real life. So why does Leonardo paint them this way? That's not what they look like. I'm so glad you asked. The reason is that Christianity, when it first began as a religion, was illegal. And it wasn't until the Edict of Milan in ancient Rome that Christianity became an officially sanctioned religion instead of a persecuted one. And in order to get more people to join the church, the Christian church changed the images, or the likeness of its figures, Mary and Jesus and the saints and the disciples, to look like the people who they were trying to bring into the church, because they know that people, are afraid of something that's different than them, especially in the medieval times, and they were more relaxed and felt more comfortable around people that looked like them. So that continues into the Renaissance, and that kind of becomes the standard for depicting Mary and Jesus. Also, although they would not have actually looked like that, Leonardo is painting the way that these figures had traditionally been shown, even though that's not historically accurate. This is a hilarious painting, I think, by Leonardo da Vinci, painted in 1490, called Lady with an Irmine. And the Irmine is this ferret-looking, terrifyingly muscular creature that this young woman is holding. Leonardo says that the ermine, with its white coat, symbolizes purity. The painting is of Cecilia Gallerani. I don't really know how to say that. Cecilia Gallerani. She was about 16 years old at the time of this painting. She was the mistress of a duke that Leonardo worked for. So he does this portrait. He only paints about 5 portraits. Like, that's it. So just the fact that it's a finished one by Leonardo makes it extremely rare. One of the things that I think is really cool about this painting is that, right, only a few portraits by him remain. It's another one that shows the three-quarter view where the body's turned toward us. Even though the figure is looking off to the side like she sees something off the screen that we don't see. But when this painting has been studied, cleaned, and x-rayed, they found Leonardo's fingerprints in the paint of the painting, which showed that at least some of it he like smoothed and blended using his fingers, which I think is fantastic. Right? We think of these incredible, paint techniques, but Leonardo did it for at least little areas. Use his fingers to blend the paint on the canvas. The Irmine is very creepy. He looks terrified and unhappy to be there. But I love the way that Leonardo paints her hand. The fingers are a little bit long, so they're a little spindly, but they have such a depth and dimension, which I think is just fantastic. And then the very last painting that we're going to look at by Leonardo da Vinci is Salvator Mundi, which again was painted around 1500. We don't know the exact date. Salvator Mundi is Latin for savior of the world. So this is a painting of Jesus, and he is doing a blessing sign with his hand, which is what a blessing would have looked like in the Renaissance. So again, we talked about why Jesus appears pasty white with light brown hair. This painting, for a long time, was thought to be a copy of Leonardo's painting. They didn't think this was actually by him. But the painting just recently, right, a few years ago, was cleaned. Art historians looked at it, and they think that it is the original that Leonardo da Vinci painted. His assistants and students have done lots of copies of this image. It's a widely copied painting by Leonardo. But this one they think is the actual original painting. So much so that in 2017, it sold at auction for $450.3 million. There is still some debate whether Leonardo painted the entire thing or just small parts of it, but the general consensus by art historians is that this is the original painting by Leonardo da Vinci, which is pretty cool. So for your journal prompt for Leonardo da Vinci, I want you to think about the Mona Lisa. What are your opinions on this painting? Does it deserve its spot as the most famous portrait in the world? Why or why not? So I want you to really think about it. We talked about why it's so famous, some of the history of it. I know she's a little creepy that she doesn't have eyebrows. That's okay. But, do you think that she deserves this title as the most famous portrait in the world? And just in general, what do you think about her? I'm excited to hear what you think, and I hope you're all doing well. Take care.